Good day, all. My other talks on healthcare have examined established theories of healthcare and have looked at the history of healthcare. In this talk, I'm going to draw some personal conclusions from all of this material. I'm going to provide some criticisms of modern healthcare and some suggestions of my own for how to counteract those criticisms and make healthcare work better. First of all, it must be said that modern medicine has had some remarkable accomplishments. More cures and treatments have been invented in the last 100 years or so than in all of human history before that. And while there is a wide variety of these treatments, the main focus of modern medicine has been on what I've called the 4 C's: cooking, cleaning, cuts, and chemicals. Or in more technical terms, nutrition, sanitation, surgery, and pharmaceuticals. Traditionally, the first 2 have been women's work, the latter 2 men's work. We looked at all 4 of them in our history of healthcare. However, I would also argue that modern medicine has a particular bias. A bias which has pushed it too far in a particular direction and is still pushing. To be precise, I would argue that modern medicine has gone too far in the direction of the 4 M's. It is too male, too military, too mechanical, and too monetarized. We've already looked at each of these issues separately. I'm going to look now at how they're all interconnected, and I'm going to look at some genuine alternatives. First of all, male domination provides an obvious link between the 4. The military, machinery, and money have always been areas dominated by men. It is inevitable that in any healthcare system dominated by men, the other 3 will yield considerable influence. And as we saw in our history, our modern healthcare system has, from the start, been dominated by men. In the 19th century, male physicians created the basic organizational structure of modern healthcare. Women started to gain more influence in healthcare in the post-war years, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. More women gained access to higher education, and so more women became doctors. And nurses became more highly skilled and better organized. But in the 80s, women's progress was swiftly reversed. Both doctors and nurses were pushed aside by a new wave of healthcare administrators brought in from the private sector who were overwhelmingly male. Doctors have lost their authority and nurses have lost their autonomy as the administration over-supervises and overworks them, leading to nurse burnout. These administrators have introduced a very male approach to healthcare. In general terms, studies have shown that when it comes to problem solving, men are more reductionist, women are more holistic. In other words, men break the problem down into little pieces and then deal with one piece at a time, whereas women look at the problem as a whole. This means that in healthcare, men provide cures for specific ailments, while women provide care for the whole person. Both types of healthcare are equally necessary and equally important. But male administrators have tried to break down the continuous process of care into compartmentalized mini cures through techniques like TQM, thereby removing the holistic understanding, continuity of care, and emotional support that nurses provide. Today, about 80% of all healthcare workers in Canada are women, and yet our healthcare system is overwhelmingly run by men. I would argue that this gender imbalance sorely needs to be corrected. As I said in a previous talk, our healthcare system needs to get back in touch with its feminine side. We need to put the running of our healthcare system back in the hands of healthcare professionals, most of whom are women. We need a healthcare system that appreciates the work that nurses and other female caregivers do. We need a healthcare system in which care is just as important as cures, in which the holistic approach is just as important as the reductionist approach. I personally believe that the reason that there are far more women than men in healthcare is simply that women care more about other people than men do. My opinion has scientific support. On personality scales, women score significantly higher than men in compassion and caring. Male doctors approach their job in much the same way as garage mechanics. Figure out the problem, fix it, move on to the next one. Women doctors will start a visit by asking about the patient's family and the kids and their vacation and so on, because they care more about the patient as a person rather than just as a medical problem. This is why I personally believe that men should not even have an equal say in our healthcare system, much less be running it. I believe that women should be in charge of our healthcare system because women care more than men do. I believe that only women can bring the care back into our healthcare system. Secondly, as we saw in the history I presented, male medicine has traditionally been military medicine. Modern surgery evolved from the needs of the battlefield, above all, the need to sew up wounds. The scalpel evolved from the soldier's sword and dagger. And as the military went from using swords to using guns, male doctors also invented an instrument with which to shoot things into their patients, the hypodermic. And just as chemistry provided gunpowder for guns, the pharmaceutical industry provided ammunition for the doctor's syringe, drugs. In short, cuts and chemicals both have a military background. As the medical profession has trained its sights, so to speak, on disease, it has continued to think in military terms. Disease is seen as an enemy which has invaded the body and which must therefore be killed. All of our drugs and antibiotics are just chemical killers. The very word antibiotic means against biology or killer. If you kill the disease, you cure the body. This is a strategy which has worked very well in the short term, but which is creating problems for the long term. Because microorganisms are not just things that we can wipe away. They are living creatures which fight to survive if you attack them. They adapt. They mutate. They turn into something stronger and more virulent. Modern drugs have virtually eradicated many of the bacteria that used to kill large numbers of people. Does this mean that we've eliminated disease? No. It just means that bacteria have given way to viruses, which are more resistant to our drugs. For example, in the field of sexually transmitted diseases, modern drugs have brought gonorrhea and syphilis under control after thousands of years, only to see the rise of HIV and AIDS. Antibiotics in general have been so overprescribed for diseases with so-called flu-like symptoms that they're becoming increasingly ineffective as these diseases mutate swiftly. COVID is a newly mutated virus which brought the world to a standstill, and it will not be the last. The more diseases we kill, the more we speed up the process of natural evolution. We are currently in the Red Queen's race, running as fast as we can just to stay still. We keep manufacturing new, more powerful drugs just to keep up with the evolution of new, more powerful diseases. The problem is that there's a limit to how powerful we can make our chemical killers before they kill us as well as the disease. In recent years, there's been a major increase in adverse drug reactions or harmful side effects associated with new drugs. We are already reaching the point where our drugs can do more harm than good. The military model of a war on disease can take you only so far before it becomes self-defeating. Instead, I would argue that we need to take a lesson from hunting and gathering society and develop a more ecological model of disease. We need to understand that the human body is both a part of the global ecosystem and an ecosystem in itself. Our body plays host to hundreds of different types of microorganisms. And as long as our body provides an ecological niche where something can survive, something will survive there. So, if you kill one occupant of that niche, then something even tougher will just move in. This is why we need to find an alternative approach to just killing microorganisms. Such an approach does exist in nature. It's called symbiosis. This is where two organisms move beyond conflict over survival to cooperation for survival. It involves establishing a relationship of mutual dependency which benefits both sides. This has happened naturally between humans and microorganisms. For example, E. coli is a bacterium which has killed huge numbers of people throughout history, and some strains of which remain fatal to this day. But thousands of years ago, one particular strain of E. coli took up residence in humanity's digestive system and established a symbiotic relationship. It helped us to break down our food, and in return, our antibodies learned to leave it alone and gave it a place to live. Today, without E. coli, we would have great difficulty in digesting our food. What was once a deadly parasite is now an essential symbiont. I would argue that this is how our healthcare system should deal with disease. Instead of attempting the impossible task of killing every microorganism that threatens us, we should modify them into something that can benefit us. We should fill our human ecosystem with microorganisms that will thrive by making our bodies work better, and that will help us fight off any deadly disease trying to occupy their ecological niche. This can be done through genetic modification, or GM. GM has already made major changes in the food we eat, and I would argue that it has the potential to change society in the 21st century just as much as the computer revolution did in the 20th century. For example, in Ottawa, among other places around the world, researchers are currently attempting to develop what are termed oncolytic viruses. These are viruses that literally eat cancer cells and tumors. Research is still in the early stages, but the idea is that in the future, if you're diagnosed with cancer, you would just go for a series of shots of this virus. Our bodies would provide the virus with food, and in return, the virus would control or even eliminate the cancer. Modern science is giving us the power to genetically modify and tailor microorganisms to meet our needs. The question is how wisely we shall use that power. We need to move beyond the military approach of trying to conquer and kill nature, and instead adopt the ecological approach of learning how to live in balance with nature. Thirdly, healthcare in industrial society has been greatly mechanized. Every area of modern medicine has its machinery. Diagnostic machinery, surgical machinery, prosthetic machinery, and so on. This machinery has saved or improved the lives of countless people. But there are healthcare services which cannot be provided by a machine, because machines cannot care. Only people can. Our healthcare system is chronically underfunded, which means that sometimes our hospitals have to choose whether to spend their money on machines or people. All too often, administrators brought in from the private sector choose machines because buying new machinery increases the profits of the corporation it is bought from, whereas hiring more people does not increase corporate profits. This has led our healthcare system to have a shortage of doctors and an even bigger shortage of nurses. Today, our healthcare system needs more people more than it needs more machines. Also, at the very heart of modern medicine is the mechanical model of the human body. This model is valid, but only up to a point. The body is a biological machine, but it is also more than that. A human being has a mind as well as a body. This means, firstly, that we need to put as much emphasis on mental health care as we do on physical health care. And secondly, It means that patients have feelings and rights which need to be respected by our healthcare system, not just body parts to be fixed. But the introduction of factory-style management in the 80s meant a more mechanical approach to healthcare. Both patients and healthcare workers were treated like machines, given standardized treatments as if they were all identical biological robots. This approach has failed because people cannot be standardized. Our healthcare system needs to provide healthcare which has been customized and re-individualized, because only in this way can our healthcare system be rehumanized. Fourth, and finally, there's the small matter of money. As I showed in my talks on privatization in North America, money changes healthcare. For-profit healthcare is very different from non-profit healthcare. The primary goal of non-profit healthcare institutions is to make patients better. The primary goal of for-profit healthcare institutions is to make money. In for-profit healthcare, patients are just a means to an end, and that end is profits. Private healthcare institutions operate just like any other business, and that they always try to minimize their expenditures and maximize their incomes. But what is a perfectly reasonable business strategy if you're selling products is not so reasonable if you're selling healthcare. Because, as we saw, that means providing fewer services at higher prices. For example, private nursing homes regularly cut costs by providing clients with poorer quality food, untrained personnel, and other measures which save money but negatively impact on their health. The profit motive, as I've said before, is great at motivating people to make things, to invent new things, and to manufacture those things. But the profit motive is not so great at motivating people to care about other people. The profit motive is inherently selfish. It's about getting money for yourself. But healthcare is inherently unselfish. It's about helping someone else. Indeed, I would go further and argue that healthcare is literally a labor of love. Money is certainly a powerful motivator, but so is love. Most nurses do not do their job for the money. They do it for love of others. I think that one of the things that's often forgotten amidst all of the arguments and statistics is that caring for a person when they're sick or frail is an act of love. Looking after a helpless human body, even when it's putting out a variety of disgusting bodily fluids, takes a lot of love. I will admit point blank that I don't have that much love for other people, and I don't think that most men do. My mother was a dentist, and my father was a gynecologist. So, coming from this medical background, my first major decision in life was that I was going to have absolutely nothing to do with the medical professions. It's a decision that I have never regretted for a moment. Teaching the sociology of health is as close as I have ever wanted to come to practicing medicine. Now, when it comes to love, the Bible tells us that greater love hath no man than he who lays down his life for his brother. Well, that may be for men. But there's that male military mind at work again, defining love in terms of a short-term heroic gesture, taking the bullet for your buddy. But women generally define love in more lasting terms. I would paraphrase the Bible and say that greater love has no woman than she who dedicates her life to the care of others. And therein lies the ultimate problem with caring for money. Because you cannot put a dollar value on emotional labor, on providing love, caring, and emotional support, which I firmly believe women are better at providing than men. So, if we allow the corporations to create a healthcare system that's all about making money, then the love and the care will be gone from our healthcare system. If we allow that to happen, we shall all suffer for it. As far as I'm concerned, while the private sector should provide the supplies that the healthcare system needs, there is no room for the profit motive in healthcare itself. This is why our healthcare system should return to the fully non-profit, state-run healthcare system that we had in the 60s and 70s, only with funding appropriate for the 21st century. Our healthcare system needs money, but that money should be provided collectively through the state. The trouble is that politicians often complain about the growing cost of Medicare. But for them, I have one frequently asked question. What is more important than your health? What does the state have to spend money on that's more important than the health of its citizens? Should not healthcare be the number one item on every government budget? In practice, it's not healthcare that the state cannot afford. It is the multi-billion-dollar handouts to big corporations that are leaving the government short on cash. It is not social programs that benefit the average person that are driving our governments into debt. It is corporate tax cuts and subsidies that only make rich corporate executives richer. As we've seen, corporations have already taken over US healthcare, and the result has been a health disaster for all but the rich. In Canada, we've managed to stall the progress of privatization, and in the future, I hope that we'll be able to roll it back. When Medicare was built by left-wing politicians like Tommy Douglas, Canada had one of the best healthcare systems and one of the healthiest populations in the world. Today, after over 30 years of cutbacks and privatization by right-wing politicians from Brian Mulroney to Stephen Harper, Canada is ranked by the World Health Organization as having one of the poorest healthcare systems and some of the poorest health in the developed world, well back of all West European countries. We tend to think that we're doing well here because we only compare ourselves to the US. But we forget that the US has the worst healthcare and the worst health in the developed world, except, of course, for the rich. So saying that we're doing better than the US is not really saying much. At this time, social inequality is increasing across North America, and part of that is an increase of inequality in health and healthcare. The rich get richer, while the poor get sicker. This has been happening since the 1970s, and it looks like it's going to go on happening for a while. However, it cannot continue indefinitely. Eventually, I believe that private healthcare will collapse under its own expense. It has already made US healthcare by far the most expensive in the world, and its cost continues to rise astronomically. It has already bankrupted millions of individual Americans, and if it continues for much longer, it may come close to bankrupting the US government. I believe that when the next major economic recession comes, private healthcare will simply become unaffordable and will be abandoned. And I believe that after that recession, the next economic upswing will see the building of a new welfare state, including a new Medicare, bigger and better than ever before. Canada today has a $2 trillion a year economy, which means that as a country we are easily rich enough to afford proper health care for all. It is not economic necessity, but right-wing political decisions which have undermined Medicare, promoted privatization, and increased inequality of both health and healthcare in Canada. But politics, like everything else, is cyclical. I believe that the right will be blamed for the next recession, and that during that recession, new political parties will emerge, like Tommy Douglas's CCF in the 1930s. After the recession, I believe those new parties will build a new 21st century welfare state with a new 21st century Medicare. This is why we study history, because history repeats itself with variations. The past can tell us, in general terms, what's likely to happen in the future. However, this new welfare state will not build itself. History provides opportunities, but opportunities must still be taken. People must mobilize, as they did in the 30s and 40s, to fight for their rights and to fight for their health. They must fight for the principle that proper health care is the right of every Canadian, not just a privilege of the rich. I believe that this will happen. I don't know whether I shall live to see it, but I believe, or at least I hope, that most of you will. Only time will tell. That concludes what I have to say on how health and healthcare could work better. A transcript of this talk is available if you're interested. Good day, all.